Patrick Costas here. So this is video of the North Korean missile launch from this weekend. Turned out to be a successful launch for them, and it actually went way further than their previous launches of this type of missile, or this is a new type of missile actually, but for their intermediate ballistic range missiles. This is a pretty good launch for them. Unfortunately for them, it's going to cost them a lot because now the UN is going to do more sanctions on them, which is going to increase the misery of the average North Korean people, which is going to increase the headaches for the regime because there's going to be more and more pissed off people that might be potential members of some kind of a coup or an uprising, and that's the regime's biggest fear. So basically, the entire world has condemned this. I mean, it has. There's really nobody supporting him. He also fired this missile awfully close to Russia, which President Trump pointed out. So that's going to be interesting to see how Vladimir Putin reacts. I know he sent out a message today saying something along the effect that the United States needs to quit, antagonizing UN or whatever. But I mean, at the end of the day, I'm sure that knowing the Russians and how they react to their security, I'm pretty sure they're a little upset that missile came with. I think it was within 60 miles of their territory or something. So it's going to raise some red flags with that. On top of that, you have this big cyber attack going on, and now there's people trying to attribute that attack to Kim Jong Un, which I don't think he's the one behind it, but that's what they're, it just goes to show you now every evil thing said or thought about Kim Jong Un will be looked at as truth simply because of his own actions and how he behaves. I mean, it basically leads anything is possible is what the average anybody would come away with after seeing how this guy reacts. So be kind of interesting to see the fallout on it, but it's gonna, this whole missile launch has made the already tense situation more tense. He's managed to turn the supposedly liberal, brand new South Korean president against him. He was elected a few days ago actually, and he came into office and he was sending out some peace feelers and olive branches to the north, and then they fire off this missile. Now this morning, he comes out and he's talking about basically demanding that there's going to be complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. A slightly different message than he had prior to the missile launch. So I really think this was a bad strategic mistake for Kim Jong-un. But I'm going to attach a lot of clips after this portion here that y'all should watch. And there's some interesting video clips in there about how China got North Korea not to do their sixth nuclear test. At least they've prevented them from doing it thus far. We'll see how that goes in the future. But there's going to be some other interesting clips on there, so I hope you enjoy them.
A Japanese news outlet claims China put a stop to a planned nuke test by North Korea. If that is indeed true, it could suggest a collaboration between Beijing and Washington's leaders may have had a positive effect. Hwang Jang-ho takes a closer look.
Japanese broadcaster TBS has reported that China is responsible for putting the brakes on North Korea's much-anticipated sixth nuclear test. North Korea is said to have informed Beijing on April 18th that they were ready to carry out a nuclear test in 2 days. But when China's reply came, warning all land and sea borders would be closed off, effectively halting all trade with the regime, Pyongyang backed out. China accounts for some 90% of North Korea's foreign trade and is an essential economic lifeline for the rogue state. TBS cites sources from the Japanese government who are said to have been relayed this information by Washington, who in turn were informed by Beijing. The report does seem to corroborate statements made by the US last month. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said in an interview with Fox News on April 27th that China had told Pyongyang not to conduct any further nuclear tests, otherwise they would take further sanctions of their own. President Trump also alluded to certain unusual moves being made in the region in a press conference on the 20th, Pyongyang's scheduled date for the nuclear test. Although it's uncertain whether those moves refer directly to these series of events, it perhaps sheds new light on President Trump's other claims that President Xi Jinping was trying very hard to rein in Pyongyang's nuclear program. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
And gasoline prices in North Korea have reportedly soared amid speculation China may limit oil supplies to the country in a bid to pressure Pyongyang over its nuclear ambitions. Citing a North Korean diplomat, Voice of America reports gasoline prices have spiked more than 85% recently. The diplomat also said there are cases where gas stations limit purchases to 10 or 20 litres per customer. Some North Korea watchers say the price surge comes as the regime is saving its gasoline stockpiles as China is reportedly reviewing its next step.
Pyongyang launched a ballistic missile early Sunday morning. What's significant about this act is that it comes just a few days after the new South Korean president, with a friendlier approach to inter-Korean relations, is sworn into office. Hwang Ho-jun starts us off with a closer look into the regretful move from up north.
North Korea has carried out its first military provocation since the launch of the new administration in South Korea just 4 days ago. South Korea's military confirmed that the North launched a ballistic missile Sunday morning around 5:30 a.m. Seoul time from an area near the city of Kusong, about 120 kilometers northwest of the regime's capital. According to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the missile flew some 700 kilometers, and judging by the flight distance, military experts are looking at the launch as a successful one. The Japanese government said the missile reached an altitude of more than 1,000 kilometers and landed in the East Sea after flying for about half an hour, but did not fall in Japan's exclusive economic zone. The exact type of missile it was is not yet clear, but the U.S. Pacific Command confirmed that the flight was not consistent with that of an intercontinental ballistic missile. This is the 7th missile provocation from Pyongyang this year alone, and comes just 2 weeks after a missile test that South Korean and U.S. officials said failed. Shortly after Sunday's launch, South Korea's National Security Council held an emergency meeting at 7 a.m., its first under the Moon Jae-in administration. It was led by the president himself for about 20 minutes, starting at 8, and they strongly condemned Pyongyang's action.
The president said the missile launch was a clear violation of the UN Security Council's resolutions and a grave threat to the peace and safety of the international community, let alone the Korean peninsula.
President Moon ordered the South Korean military to be on full readiness based on the steadfast alliance with the U.S. to deal with any military actions from the North and to speed up the establishment of South Korea's own missile defense system called the Korea Air and Missile Defense, or KAMD. Regarding the possibility of dialogue with Pyongyang, which President Moon has said he is open to, he reiterated that a change in North Korea's attitude must come first. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
Pyongyang claims it is ready for a meeting with Washington. Choi Sun-hee, the Director General of the North America Bureau of North Korea's Foreign Ministry, told reporters in Beijing on Saturday the regime will hold talks with the United States under the right conditions. She was returning from Norway after meeting with a group of American experts, including Robert Einhorn, the U.S. State Department's former special advisor for nonproliferation and arms control. Choi's response raises the possibility for bilateral contact after months of heightened tensions, especially since U.S. President Donald Trump himself did mention he would be honored to meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un if the conditions were right. When asked whether the reclusive state is preparing for talks with the Moon Jae-in administration in South Korea, she said the situation is being observed.
Here's what I find concerning. It traveled an altitude of 1,200 miles, a distance of 435 miles, only 60 miles shy of Russia. The altitude factor, if you change the angle of that, you can go a lot further away. Nonetheless, this would have encompassed all of Japan and all of South Korea. What finds you concerned about that now?
That's right. It's a medium-range ballistic missile. Which means essentially it's got the capability to reach U.S. air bases in the Pacific, including Guam. So in that sense, this test constitutes a direct threat to U.S. national security interests. Any test, any ballistic missile test by the North Korean regime at this moment is a flagrant violation of UN Security Council resolutions and constitutes a security threat to their region and to the United States, and that's the new reality that we're facing.
I thought Nikki Haley's comment on ABC was very interesting. Listen to what she said about how she describes the mindset of the North Korean leader.
I think this was a message to South Korea after the election, and so what we're going to do is continue to tighten the screws. He feels it. He absolutely feels it.
She said he's isolated and he knows it. That was the first part of the comment there. Do those comments matter to this isolated leader? How so?
The rhetoric matters a great deal. I think what the Trump administration overall, not just the president and the UN ambassador, are kind of using here is what I would call soft power, smart power, excuse me, on the surface of things anyway. What they're doing is keeping all military options on the table and making that explicit publicly, but what they're really doing here is a major push for diplomacy. Remember, it was just the week before last, President Trump said that he would consider opening up a dialogue with the North and even meeting with Kim Jong-il if Kim Jong-un, if he was open to this kind of a dialogue with us. Following suit last Tuesday was the newly elected South Korean president who said the same thing. So there's this major concerted push among the six-party nations here to try and get diplomacy to fix the problem. What we don't really know and what has failed over the last 8 to 16 years is exactly this kind of approach. I don't see anything new the Trump administration is doing, but they're at least getting the rhetoric right. What we'll see over the coming weeks is if they get the policy.
North Korea says it can carry a nuclear warhead. It's an intelligence question. Do we know if that is true or not?
Nothing publicly has been verified, but it has been believed for many years now that that is indeed the case. And that's why this threat is not like the threat we see from many other U.S. adversaries around the globe. It is believed that once this capacity is sort of foolproof, which is something they're working up to, it will constitute an immediate danger to our nation. And so this is something that weighs heavily on, it's weighed heavily on the Bush administration, on the Obama administration, and now on the Trump administration.
Our top story this morning, the United Nations Security Council is gearing up to roll out new sanctions against North Korea and boost the enforcement of existing ones following the regime's recent missile launch. This is according to Francois Delattre, the French envoy to the UN. British Ambassador Matthew Rycroft also told reporters that he backs international efforts to rein in North Korea. Security Council members are set to meet on Tuesday local time, and that's early Wednesday morning Korea time, for an emergency meeting. Following the meeting, they're expected to adopt a press statement that condemns Pyongyang's latest missile test. And the international community is continuing to react to North Korea's recent missile launch. The U.S., Russia, and the UN have condemned Pyongyang for its destabilizing actions, but Russian President Vladimir Putin is suggesting the related parties try more carrot and a little less stick to coax the regime back to talks. Kim Yo-sun reports.
The United States is urging North Korea to cease its provocative actions and rhetoric, following the regime's threat that its newly tested missile could strike the U.S. mainland. State Department spokeswoman Katina Adams says Pyongyang needs to make the strategic choice to fulfill its international obligations and commitments. Russian President Vladimir Putin also strongly condemned Pyongyang's unacceptable missile launch, but he called on related parties to stop intimidating and threatening the regime.
We need to return to dialogue with North Korea and stop scaring it and find ways to resolve these problems peacefully. Is it possible? I think it is.
Putin reiterated Moscow's stance that it will not tolerate a nuclear-armed North Korea, saying it would be counterproductive, harmful, and dangerous. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres also denounced Pyongyang's missile test and urged the North to move toward denuclearization. The statement comes a day before the UN Security Council is scheduled to convene an urgent session to discuss North Korea's latest missile test. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.